Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. The startup scene in recent years has been a bit of a roller coaster. First, there was a boom, particularly in the tech space, with some really exciting things happening. More recently, though, with inflation and interest rates rising, we've seen startup valuations wound back and staff being laid off. But there's one aspect of the startup space that we haven't really talked much about. It's corporate venturing, where larger existing companies are getting involved in startups or developing their own innovative businesses. Boston Consulting Group is one of the largest consulting firms in the world, and BCG Digital Ventures is its business building and innovation arm. Kevin Lucas is the managing director and partner at BCG Digital Ventures, Sydney. Kevin, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thanks, Sean. It's great to be here.
So let's start off with the definition. What exactly is corporate venturing?
So corporate venturing, I think, is trying to solve for the challenge that you just articulated pretty well. There's been, over the last decade or so, a huge growth in what's happening in the venture capital and startup scene, and corporates have been left a little bit behind. So there's a great interest from large businesses is how they tap into some of the dynamics of what's gone on in that community and apply it in a corporate context. And corporate venturing really tries to solve for that, find startup type growth opportunities, but in a corporate context.
Okay, so I know Woolworths has done stuff around artificial intelligence, although it's probably a bit beyond startup. Qantas, in fact, did stuff in media. Is that the sort of thing we're talking about?
Yeah, I think corporate venturing can take a company in a number of different ways. You could think about it as how to build a reinvented version of your current products or your current business model, how to enter markets in which you're not particularly strong but are lucrative for your brand and your customer base, as well as to how to tap into some of the interesting things that technology is offering. There are all sorts of interesting solutions that are available now that were harder to solve for 10 years ago. So I think corporate venturing can actually cover the spectrum of all of those things depending on what the priority is for the corporate.
It might be about reinventing a business, but presumably most corporates don't go into something that they have no need for or knowledge of. So, I suppose the Woolworths artificial intelligence, that's a data play for Woolworths to understand their customers better. That's the sort of thing that corporates are thinking about. It's about building on their own business as opposed to starting something new.
I think what we've learned at Digital Ventures over the last 8 years or so is if corporates venture too boldly and bravely beyond what they know, the probability of succeeding starts to decrease pretty quickly. And that's not a space that corporate executives typically want to venture into. So I think what we found the sweet spot is how do you push far enough from the BAU bounds of what you do week in, week out, but ensure that your strategic advantages, your core assets are something that you're actually going to be able to use to play. And you touched on some great examples. Qantas has ventured into the credit card business, into the insurance business, into the retail business. I think all of that off the back of a really strong loyalty program and a large customer base as an example. CBA recently has ventured into the e-commerce space in a number of different ways, which you wouldn't say is analogous with banking off the back, but actually there's a lot of commonality between what consumers are doing online, how they're spending, how they're thinking about purchases and how banks can support them in that journey. So it's about finding connective tissue between the new opportunity and what the core business does.
Okay, and is it increasingly widespread?
8 years ago, we spent most of our time trying to tell people what corporate venturing was and why it was interesting in a portfolio of investment. I think now the rhetoric has moved on a lot to we understand why we might do it and how do we do it and where do we do it. It's definitely much more widespread in Australia today. There are a number of companies in the ASX 100 that have either done this or are actively doing it. And I would say on the global scale, even more widespread again.
Okay, and then in sort of staying on that theme, is it something that's a travel company or a bank or a retailer is more likely to do than a miner, for example? Like, are there certain industries where it just seems to be getting more of a life of its own?
Yeah, so certainly when we started, I would say we were more focused in B2C opportunities, partly because it's easier to tap into the problem space. Consumer research is relatively cost efficient and simple to run, and then building mobile web-based solutions for consumers is a relatively inexpensive exercise. So I think that was a safe place to start. But certainly today, that has progressed well beyond simple B2C into quite complicated B2B, and certainly not beyond the miners to do things in this space. A great example that comes to mind immediately, a venture that we built in Europe with De Beers, which was looking at proving provenance for diamonds that were dug up in diamond mines in Africa and shipped and sold all across the world, largely to avoid challenges that they've had for a long time around things like conflict diamonds, and that's been done through blockchain decentralization protocols. So I think there is almost no bounds to where this category, where this space can go. There are just different challenges to solve depending on whether you're more B2C or B2B focused.
Stay with me, Kevin. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is Kevin Lucas, Managing Director and Partner at BCG Digital Ventures, Sydney. Okay, I want to get on to what some of the ones that you've worked with or BCG Digital Ventures has worked with. But just before we get there, I mean, many businesses go through cycles where they want to do everything themselves, and then there's other times where they think, let's outsource it or take a share in it or, partner with someone. It sort of sounds like as the world becomes a bigger place for a business and they see greater opportunities, and mostly because of technology, they are increasingly partnering with people rather than doing it themselves.
Yeah, and I think that's a continuum decision rather than a binary choice. So on the spectrum of things that you can do in a portfolio, M&A is still alive and well, and corporates will continue to pursue that. I would suggest typically it's where it's closer to the core business. When corporates are building, I'd see they're doing it in two different ways, but always with a view that they're trying to build something that is bespoke and uniquely advantaged to them. And the build component tends to focus on the bit that's got the highest point of differentiation in market. So I want to own the user experience. I want to own the value proposition. I want to own some of the data. I'm less worried about the platforms and the infrastructure and the licensing, and I'm super willing to partner with those that have solved what you might call more industry-wide or protocol problems. And that's actually a really efficient way to go about it, because when you go into corporate venturing, you are taking some risk. And you want to mitigate that upfront as much as possible. So the combination of building things that matter and partnering with others to solve known problems and scale is a very logical approach, actually.
Okay, so why do companies, this is a bit of a Dorothy Dixer really, but why do companies use people like you, BCG Digital Ventures?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different reasons. I mean, all organizations are very busy, and trying to find capacity in the organization to go chase new things is hard. Running the day-to-day is pretty time consuming. So in some ways we provide capacity to organizations who just don't have it. But I think more importantly, we have built over the last 8 years or so a pretty robust methodology to do this in a very time-boxed, capitally efficient way. So we know exactly what questions to answer in what time series. We know the problems to go solve. We know the parts of a corporate venture that you really need to ensure work and how to test that they are working before you put a lot of capital into it. And then we have a great team. I think talent's really important in the startup community. It's also really important in the corporate venturing community. And we have a great multidisciplinary team of product people, designers, engineers, growth architects who are sort of uniquely qualified to work out how to build corporate ventures from start to end.
Okay, can you take me through, De Beers was a great example. Do you have another example, perhaps more locally, where you've worked with businesses?
Yeah, one I could talk about very quickly. So we launched a business in Australia the middle of last year, which is a disruptor to the insurance market. So that was launched with HCF, a well-known health insurer. Business is called Flip. It's been in market for about 12 months now. And it's basically trying to find ways to make insurance more relevant and more available to the mass market in a more digital manner. So you can buy insurance on demand through a mobile app, switch it on, switch it off, cover yourself in your moment of need, and get away from some of the typical high cost multi-year premium models that exist today. So I think that's a great example of where an insurance company has stayed within their category but built quite a disruptive product in a corporate venturing manner.
It's a very tech concept where you need to disrupt yourself, really.
Yeah, I think in certain industries, the question of disrupt yourself or be disrupted is very real for executives and boards. And those that are willing to take that challenge on headfirst have typically been very successful. So I think it's a bold move, but can be a very, very advantageous one for those that do it well.
And is it very cyclical? So at the moment, we had the pandemic, so I'm sure that would have affected what people were prepared to do or businesses were prepared to do around corporate venturing. Now we have rising interest rates and they'll keep going higher. Inflation, which might be near a peak, but it's pretty high at the moment. Does that all work into the equation?
It does. I mean, I think it's worth noting that corporate venturing is a multi-year investment journey, and you can't expect immediate ROI. You're in it for the medium to long game. And when pressures are heightened, it does make organizations think twice. But certainly what everyone learned through the COVID experience was a defensive strategy is not helpful either, because you get further left behind. So I think now where I'm seeing corporate venturing heading is, how do you just get the choice right between the amount of risk you're willing to take off and how close to your core business and your immediate needs what you do is? So I think the inflationary market is making people aware, but it's just making them think more carefully about where they would want to take bets as opposed to not taking any at all.
And my final question, are boards and management prepared for this?
It's definitely a journey, and I think educating people along the way is important. So I spoke a minute ago about the value of the very disciplined and rigorous methodology, and that in part is designed to take people on the journey. The analogy in venture capital is you start with a seed round and you build your way up to your series A, B, C, and we apply the same logic in a corporate context. It's about going on the journey and increasing your conviction and confidence at each step of the way.
Kevin, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
My pleasure. Thanks for the time.
That was Kevin Lucas, Managing Director and Partner at BCG Digital Ventures, Sydney. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.